The Outsider podcast shares the opinions and analyses of Drew Landry. They are his thoughts, and his thoughts alone, and do not necessarily reflect every member of his audience or newsletter readers. Now, on with the show.
All right, welcome in to another episode of the Outsider Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Drew Landry, and appreciate you being here with me and listening in to the best politics podcast west of I-35 in the great state of Texas. Before we get started with today's content, I want to make a small plug for the Outsider newsletter that you can subscribe to on Substack. You can find me on Facebook at The Outsider. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple iTunes and on Spotify. Go find The Outsider on YouTube. You can follow The Outsider on X, and you can also find me on X and Bluesky and on Threads, where you can just throw me a follow, and that would be greatly appreciated. And so with that said, here's what I'm going to get into today. We're going to talk about what happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota over the last weekend. We're going to get into that. Then I'm going to talk about just basically how the right's whole head has exploded dealing with the president's comments and his administration's comments on the Second Amendment, and how that has faced a lot of backlash from people who have always thought that the president was essentially the chosen one, if you will, in so many ways of the conservative movement. So with that in mind, let's get into today's content. It's worth mentioning here that I want to give a shout out to the Avalanche Journal, Lubbock Avalanche Journal, and Amarillo Globe News for publishing my opinion piece. It's not an op-ed. First off, let me just understand that. An op-ed is short for opposite editorial. All right, it's opposite of the editorial board. So that's if the editorial board made a piece and you're writing opposite of that. That would be an op-ed. It doesn't mean an opinion piece at all. It's just, that is just within the common lexicon that just needs to be dispelled. I'm not writing anything opposite of the editorial board for the AJ, for the Lubbock AJ, or the Avalanche GN, Globe News. I'm just writing an opinion piece that I think people need to be aware of. And I've been saying stuff like this for some time about how the polling of things is not just something you can just sneeze at. It can be a pretty good indicator as to what you should do, or you may have gone too far. So with that said, let's understand where we are in this whole concept of elections. In Texas, the primary is in March. All right, it's the first Tuesday in March, and in 2026, that would land on March the 3rd, the day after Independence Day in Texas. And we have this early primary basically along with a lot of other states, on what's dubbed Super Tuesday, because we want to feel important. That's the whole mindset of that. But in political science, that's called front loading, which if a bunch of states have their primaries early, then essentially how important are you? If you're like a small state, say like a state like West Virginia, and you move your primary up to, maybe on March the 3rd, or in mid-March or something like that, candidates who are running for that, especially in presidential politics, are going to have to ask themselves, do I really want to spend time in West Virginia, where there may not have a lot of delegates, or I can spend time in Texas or Florida or Michigan or whatever that have a lot more delegates than West Virginia? So how exactly are you helping yourself by moving your primary up? And what you find is it doesn't really do as much help than than one may think. But since this is a non-presidential election, since this is a midterm year, that front-loading thing doesn't really matter as much as it does in presidential elections. That said, there's a pretty small amount of time to campaign after declaring, and then there's the primary. Now, if you're in a competitive primary, that's a big deal. Okay, people like John Cornyn, the senior senator of Texas, John Cornyn, who really has two major competitors in Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton and Congressman Wesley Hunt. He's got, these guys are duking it out using a pro wrestling lingo here in a three-way match, trying to. Two of them are trying to get on to the next round in a runoff, and while one is just wanting to really just survive. And so you got that happening, but that is going to really take a temperature for what's going to take place over the next few months. So that's where we are in our political calendar here in the Lone Star State. We're in primary season. And if you're on the Republican side, what you're saying is all the conservative stuff. You're saying all of the MAGA things. And that may have taken a bit of a detour, may have had a bit of a stop when it comes to what happened last Saturday on January 24th, 2026, when Customs and Border Patrol, CPB, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, these agents decided that Alex Preddy, an ICU nurse working out of the VA, felt that they needed to tackle him, mob him, and then later kill him. And as that whole event took place, and as it had a rippling effect throughout the rest of the day and then later into the weekend, you saw people not just react, but you saw people think differently and think critically about ICE's role in immigration enforcement. Now, one thing has to be clear. The president wanted all this. The president wanted to put on a show. President Trump, and even whenever he wasn't president, always loved a show. Let's just face the fact. He always loved a good show. He always loved to talk about his ratings when he was on NBC with The Apprentice. Matter of fact, whenever he was president and Arnold Schwarzenegger was the star of The Apprentice, he talked about how low the ratings were and how Arnold's a big loser and all this crap. Obviously, he had nothing better to really do other than complain about the ratings that NBC was getting because he wasn't on The Apprentice. So he loves a big show. And his whole thing was to put this sort of thing, to put this sort of event on cable news. Put it on Fox. Put it on One American News Network. Okay? Put it on Newsmax. Get his ratings, get his approvals up, and let everyone know that he's taking crime, and he's going hard at crime, and what you gonna do, brother, when it comes to that, And if you dare to resist me, you are somehow on the side of the illegals. And Democrats are always on the side of the illegals, blah, 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 blah. I won 2020, blah, 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 blah. I only lost because of fraud, blah, 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 blah. One thing needs to be clear. And I said this before, and it bears repeating. You had 62 cases, dude. 62. You lost every one of them. So, but he doesn't care. I mean, he's going to keep this whole thing up because it's keeping face with the MAGA movement. I mean, imagine the monster that he created. He now tells them, you know what, I really did lose. He'd have a revolt within MAGA. Heck, he's having one right now with the whole Epstein thing. But this sort of show that he puts out there on the streets of Minneapolis, Even here in where I'm broadcasting in Lubbock, Texas, you see ICE, you see CPB taking shape. Even in a south of here, in a city that's about the size of Lubbock, it's called Abilene. ICE is there. Okay, CPB's there, and you're seeing this sort of display of people being taken away. But the spectacle that he always wanted was taking place in Minneapolis. He wanted that sort of thing. He wanted that show. And he wanted to be on the right side of it. He wanted the public, especially those independent voters, to say, that's our president. That's the guy I voted for. But he lost that argument about, 6 weeks into his presidency. I mean, let's understand what was taking place here. Yeah, look, one of the biggest problems with the Biden administration was the border. Let's make no mistake about that. I think having apprehensions is a good thing because that means you actually have agents who are enforcing the laws. That's the whole point. But what the president has done is just amp that up. He's amped it up to the nth degree here, and he has made apprehensions, interactions, anything to do with the border has been dropped tremendously. And that's one of his strongest issues. Make no mistake about it. But what else is taking place is that wasn't good enough for someone like Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is the White House Deputy Chief of Staff for the president. And he's a key advisor to the president. And so what he's going to do, what he does is say, he tries to help the president form policy. And now he has told ICE and CPB that you need to go deeper into the United States. You need to get people who are coming out of Home Depot. You need to go into those areas. You need to get 2,000, 3,000 deportations a week. And you have to ask yourself, how many more people does he have to get? I mean, whenever you've secured the border, which that's a big talking point for the Republicans and for President Trump, it is. This midterm coming up, if he can muster enough energy, if he can take enough naps to where he can have a good rally, maybe if he can sleep all the way up to the point that he doesn't fall asleep while he's talking, which is exactly what he was doing in Davos, Switzerland. My gosh. I've never seen a president just ramble on about nothing for over an hour. But if he can just stay on topic, if he can stay on topic and not, yell like he did in the at the end of his first year in office, stay focused on the task at hand, he can actually be beneficial. But the Trump that everyone knows is flipping a coin in the air. You're going to get Uncle Ramble, know nothing, no one knows what he's talking about, or are you going to get someone who is laser focused? The laser focused Trump you don't really see much of him. Apparently he's not fun. I don't know. But him going out there to go campaign is good if he can stay on topic and if he can talk about the issue to help Republicans that he was enforcing all the immigration stuff, that this congressman, this senator helped me secure the border, and they are going to help America, blah 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 blah. Okay, that's his strongest issue. That was one of the big things that he inherited from the Biden years. The other one was inflation. Folks, that hasn't really changed. I mean, the president he just makes stuff up. And when he's held accountable, he calls people names, like he called that reporter Piggy, and he fights with the media, and the media doesn't have a shred of a spine to fight back with him, to tell him how wrong he is, because he is. I mean, 99.9% of what that man says is false. I've never known any other president to have such lying ability as I do with Donald Trump. There's a few things he gets right. There's a lot of things he just expands on. He just makes up. But that's what MAGA likes. They like the Trump that just makes stuff up and makes, if you disagree with him, somehow you're some unpatriotic goofball. Whatever. But his ability to, in his rhetoric, to secure the border that's a key point for him. But what everybody doesn't like is the way he's doing it. Because it was always said we're going after the bad guys. It turns out there wasn't that many bad guys to go after. Because then after that, you constantly saw how they're going after people in Lowe's or Home Depot, or they're going after farm workers, or they're going after people who are sleeping, and all this stuff. And so what happened in Minneapolis was the spectacle Trump always wanted. The president always wanted that, except it didn't go the way that he wanted it to. And I'm not just talking about the shooting of Alex Preddy. Also talking about the shooting of Renee Good. And the message that comes from the administration is quite simply this. They tell you one thing. They're also telling you to not believe what you see. They are telling you that Renee Good tried to run over that CPB agent, that ICE agent. No, she wasn't. I've watched that video I don't know how many times. Folks, here's how I know she wasn't trying to run over the person. She was taking her car and moving the steering wheel away from the agent. That's what happened. Even whenever the video first came out, it came out when he was doing a 2-hour interview with the New York Times. They stopped the interview. He showed them the video. Says, look, she's trying to run over the agent. See that? And they go, sir, that's not what I see. That's not what happened. Well, and then you have his defenders come out and say, well, drive, baby, drive. Again, to revert back to an older episode of the podcast, the right knows a lot about drive, baby, drive. Charlottesville, 2017. I haven't forgotten about it. They did. But but they also want to say, just listen to law enforcement and you won't have any problems. We'll get to that in the argument in just a second. But here's the other part that Kristi Noem, Department of Homeland Security Secretary, Kash Patel, FBI and ATF Director, he's both, Stephen Miller, who's a ghoul, key advisor to the president, just a big amateur loser. We're all saying that Alex Preddy was a domestic terrorist. A domestic terrorist. And that Preddy was brandishing a weapon. He was brandishing a weapon. And CPB took him down. And so they tried to defend the agents here. It's worth mentioning, it's worth asking, why was the agent getting in front of Renee Good's vehicle? He wasn't doing it because he wanted that person to stop. He was doing it because he's being a jerk face. There's another word I want to use, but I'm going to try and keep this thing clean. He was doing it because he was exponentially enlarging his small power. And he was video recording that And then he wasn't being ran over. His phone dropped, so he can grab his gun and shoot her several times. That's why his phone fell down. He wasn't being ran over. No. And then they say, oh, he went to the hospital for internal bleeding. I want to see proof of that. No. After he called her several names after shooting her and watching her run into the post, no, he wasn't internally bleeding. That's a bold-faced lie is what that is. And so this whole thing about Alex Pretty being a domestic terrorist, again, false. 1,000% false. How many domestic terrorists do you know who are nurses? First of all, you probably don't know any domestic terrorists. If you do, you'd probably be tracked by the FBI and CIA and all the others. But just a brief examination of both of those videos easily, you don't even have to think about it that much. It easily distorts that very concept, that very narrative, that somehow there's something there, that somehow they're not what you see. Don't believe your eyes. Something very Orwellian about that. But these instances, especially with the killing of Pretty, they've moved the needle of public support away from ICE and CPB actions. They have. They've moved them away. And this is seen, and I'm not just making this up, this is seen in recent surveys from colleges and media outlets that suggest more Americans, even the non-MAGA Republicans, think ICE has gone too far. Think CPB's gone too far. And they disapprove of the administration's approach on immigration and or believe that ICE should be abolished. Texas is not always representative of the national opinion, but because Texas is a little bit more conservative than what people want than the rest of the country. And I say that because of the way that it votes. People say, well, Drew, there's a lot of non-voters in Texas. Well, sure. Of course. I know that. Anybody with half a brain knows that. Well, how can you say this? Because when there's an election, Republicans win. There's more Republicans in the legislature than there are Democrats. A Republican has not lost a statewide race since 1994. A Republican has not lost a Senate race since 1988. That's how I can say that. Well, Drew, it's you really got to think about. No, I don't need to think about anything else. So and a presidential candidate has not lost Texas since Gerald Ford in '76. Jimmy Carter is the last Democrat to win Texas as a presidential nominee. And he barely beat Ford in '76 here in Texas. It was really close. So no. I just have to roll my eyes. So whenever I say it's not always representative of national opinion, that's exactly what I mean. But in this case, you actually see the pattern being pretty similar. And I looked at polling from the from the Texas Politics Project. And there is a plurality of Texans, a plurality of respondents to this poll that feel immigration enforcement has gone too far. This consists of almost half of Texas's independent voters and 9% of Republicans. That's more than what you would really want if you're a Republican. You'd probably want that to be down to about 2 or 3%. Almost 10. That's bigger than what you want to think here, folks. And so with this being fresh in our minds, polling still suggests, I mean, even though the incident, the killings in Minneapolis are fresh in our minds, and let's not be coy and say that they aren't, because they are. One thing that comes back that is a consistent concern for respondents in Texas and in America, the top issue is the economy and inflation. And so when we look at polling, the president is so underwater on all this. He's failed. It's a failing grade. Real Clear Politics' average approval ratings has the economy for the president. His approval rating on the economy hovers around 41%. Average approval on inflation is even worse. That's 38%. It's around 38% on inflation. Two issues that the president captured people's attention on at the time in the 2024 election. That was a key part of the campaign. You got to give credit. The only reason Trump won in 2024 was because he listened to his staff, who told him, I know you want to be all crazy, man, but that's how you lost 2020. You were all, I mean, you just seemed so out of touch and so uncaring. I mean, you had your response to COVID was dismal, was awful. I mean, the way that you approached things was just stupid. There was no leadership there. Actually suggesting that perhaps bleach could kill COVID, and then you had people doing stuff to ingesting bleach. This happened. So he was able to actually not swing at every pitch that was thrown to him. There was some reserved nature there. That's good on his campaign to do that, to stick to the messaging. And let's just face it, folks, in 2024, the Biden economy on inflation was not good. It was bad. Employment was good. Job creation was great. But inflation was bad. And let's just be honest about this. Biden's inability to recognize that and to sell that message to the average American voter was also bad. Trump's having the exact same issue. This just goes to show that someone like Donald Trump doesn't go to a grocery store. He doesn't care. He can't tell you what the price of anything is. Someone tells him, sir, it's this amount. This guy who appears to be smart said it's like this. I believe that guy. He's a good guy. No way he's a good guy because I said so. His inability to relate and to actually understand why this is a problem makes it a problem for him. That's why he's polling so terribly bad on the economy and on inflation. Two issues that propelled him back to the White House. And you look at Texas, a state that he won 3 times. The third time was the best one for him. His approval ratings on those particular issues are also bad. We're talking about 38% of Texans either have a strong or somewhat approve of the president's handling of the economy. 33% of that same respondent group approve strongly or somewhat of the president's handling on inflation and prices. How the heck do you have a 38% approval on the economy and 33% approval on inflation and prices on a state that you've won 3 times? How? A majority of Texas independent voters disapprove, either strongly or somewhat, of the president's handling of both of those issues. So what am I talking about here? The president's leadership on Minneapolis, leadership on immigration enforcement, leadership on the economy, leadership on inflation, is not doing well. It's not. It is not doing well at all. Not at all. And so when you look at this, you have to ask yourself, so what's the big deal? It's January, Drew. It's January. Things can change. This is much ado about nothing. You're making a big deal. You're just kicking straws around. You're just, trying to make a big dust about nothing that isn't anything. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. And while that's true, look, let's just face a fact here. It is the beginning of the year. Things can change. Public opinion is fluid. It is not concrete. It can change. And Republicans have consistently won in Texas at the state level. All that's true. But what you need to remember is this is a midterm election. And usually in such an election, in midterms, the voter enthusiasm rests with the party opposite of the president. So because of that, Republicans may feel less motivated to vote in November. And there's 2 surveys that suggest this, that suggest that Democrats actually have a lead on the Republicans in voter enthusiasm, and it's by double digits. So what's the big deal about voter enthusiasm? Well, historically, that kind of enthusiasm gap leads to a voter turnout gap. So voter enthusiasm can lead to votes. And if you're not enthused to vote, you're not going to. And this can be translated whenever you look at a generic ballot between a generic Democrat and a generic Republican. The Democrats have an edge. Now, since it's now at about 4.7% higher than that of the Republican. Folks, 8 years ago, Democrats had a near double-digit lead on that. Things can change. And then you have to look at the president's approval record, which is not good by any standard. You're looking at the president's approval record, his current approval rating, You look at the average of that done by Real Clear Politics, it's close to 43%. Nationwide, Texas is at 44%. So what's the big deal about that? Because voters may be punishing the president's party for his unpopular policies. And or the presidential unpopularity in general. That's why. You just look at the last 30 years. You go back to 1996. From 96 to 24. I'm sorry, 96 to 22. And you look at those midterm elections. You know how many times the president's party gained seats in the House of Representatives? Twice. Bill Clinton in 98, George W. Bush in 2002. Why? Because their approval ratings were above 60% at that time. Different circumstances to be clear, but the approval rating was above 60%, and that led to their party gaining. Trump isn't even close to 60. He's not even close to 50. You look at Trump this time last year, he had a positive approval rating. You look at him in late January, early February of 2025, his approval rating was above 50%. And then he reminded everybody as to why the country didn't vote for him in 2020. The presidential midterm burden is hard to shake, let's just be clear, which is why the president advocated, I wrote about this, y'all remember this, he advocated for states to actually gerrymander their House districts, the House of Representatives. It was likely done for no other reason than to hold on to power. And in 14 states, that actually happened. It started with Texas. Texas was the one that kicked the domino. Texas, then came California. You had this gerrymandering tit for tat. Well, Drew, gerrymandering happens in both parties. Look, I'm the first one to tell you that. But doing a mid-decade gerrymandering because the president doesn't want to lose seats in the House tells me he can't run on his record, tells me he's just a big whiny little coward, and it also tells me that he has no interest in being bipartisan. Zero. No interest in wanting to actually govern with people who may disagree with him. He only wants his toys in the toy box. Only his stuff in the sandbox. And no one else's. So you have to ask yourself here, wouldn't such a gerrymander, wouldn't that shield Republicans from the upcoming midterm plague? It would, but it doesn't guarantee it. The nonpartisan analysis from the Cook Political Report has 18 House seats that have been or could be gerrymandered, have them rated for close races. Even in those races, even in those districts, Democrats have more than just a mere shot. They have a real chance of winning those things. So it's worth remembering right now that the Republicans are in deep trouble of holding the power in the House. Deep trouble. What about the Senate? Senate's a whole different ballgame. Those are statewide elections, but the stink, the modus vivus of an unpopular president can descend upon those elections. It can absolutely stick to them too. It doesn't always mean that the Senate and the House behave the same way. They don't. Districts are much more heard from the people. Statewide elections, you got a bigger electorate there than in districts. But that's where the Republicans are now. Let's remember something here. Things can change. That's the good news for the Republicans. With a better tone for what happened in Minnesota, an attempt to rethink ICE, and a call for accountability, those are steps in the right directions. And folks, we've heard that. We've heard that. You've heard that from Lisa Murkowski out of Alaska. You've heard that out of Governor Abbott, Texas Governor Abbott, Ted Cruz, the very junior Senator Ted Cruz said all that. We got to do something better with this. We're not winning the public relations war, which will lead to elections, which will lead to a big Republican loss if we don't change course here. And to that credit, little Greg Bavino, itty bitty Greg, he's been ousted. Trump told him to go home. Tom Holman, he's going to take over in Minnesota. Okay. But I want to make one thing clear here. Holman worked for Obama. He worked for President Obama, did the exact same thing. You know what he didn't do? Make a spectacle of things. And Obama has deported more people than Trump. And that bothers Trump. Everything that Barack Obama did has made him more loved by independents than anything Trump has ever done. And that bothers Trump. Trump is one of these people who just wants to be loved. I mean, Trump is one of these people who wants to walk onto your grass, defecate it, and then say, "Why are you not thanking me for fertilizing your grass? Why are you not thanking me? You're an ungrateful person. You're an ugly person." And that's just basically what you're dealing with here. But I will tell you what the problem will be for the Republicans if they go further with this. If they go all in on the tariffs. They continue on with the tariffs. They go after and track legal immigrants, which is what the governor's doing. He's asked universities and colleges to tell him who all is working there with an H-1B visa. And now he's wanting to stop all H-1B visas. By the way, can you start with Elon Musk? Can you do that too? Because if he was doing what he did under the old laws, like if what was legal or somewhat in a gray area, as he put it, when he was around during the Clinton years, that would be right now. If he did all that then, now, he'd be deported. He'd be rounded up under those circumstances. But because he's a trillionaire and he's the world's most fertile man and he's white, nothing's going to happen to him. Just as long as he keeps donating to Trump and, saying how nice Trump is and, oh, how I grovel at the feet of Donald. God. So, but if they go in all in on tariffs, they track legal immigrants. Starts rambling again all over himself and speeches, doubling down on this silly notion that protesters, and yes, there's an Amarillo columnist who called these people without offering any bit of evidence, paid rabble-rousers. If they victim blame, and they never address the issues that the average American really cares about. There is a collective risk of being perceived as being out of touch. You're doing that. You go on and you just ramble on for an hour about what no one knows what the heck you're talking about on the world stage. You go out and campaign, and then you attempt to weave, and then you're just out in the woods, which that's what he does every time. You call people who protest you paid rabble-rousers, paid protesters, professional protesters. Show me the receipts. Show me the alien. Prove to me that they are getting paid. Then I will have no doubts that they are. Bambi, deer in the headlights, cross-eyed, whatever you want to call him, Kash Patel, FBI and ATF director, who's using taxpayer dollars to have his own security, especially for his own girlfriend. Google that, by the way. I'm not making it up. Spends more time doing illegal things, that's rumored, in nightclubs. That part's true. He is going to nightclubs. Apparently told the New York Post, I have evidence. I'm not going to show you yet, but I have evidence. That's the way it's always been. Mike Lindell, evidence that the 2020 election was stolen. Donald Trump, I'm going to hold a press conference next week to unload all the evidence. He canceled the press conference. It's never been addressed since because he doesn't have it. Now he's trying to go after Georgia again, holding all that stuff again. Because, again, folks, all this stuff that happened 6 years ago, he just can't be like Elsa and let it go. He just can't. Unbelievable. But if the Republicans want to do that, and you just want to keep doing that for the next 10 months, 9+ now, go ahead. Do so at your own peril. Because there's going to be Democratic politicians who aren't going to let you forget about the Epstein files, about Elon Musk, Senator Congressman Musk, which is essentially what he is, Renee Good, Alex Preddy, little Greg Bovina, deer in the headlights Patel, completely out of it, Kristi Noem. Crusty Kristi Noem. And Pam Blondie. No, I mean, these are just... if it's easy to come back to this. This administration is just so easy to beat up. Vice President Guy Liner, who has said that if the media won't pick up on a story, we'll just make one up. Then I guess he really does love couches. Okay. So this is going to be a bigger deal than what many people want to really, than those on the right really want to make it out to be. they're hoping that it all just goes away, just like Epstein, just like this whole Greenland crap. I mean, I've never heard, and just one small word on that, I've never heard a single rational explanation as to why the United States needs to acquire Greenland. Well, the Golden Dome. We're going to have to defend ourselves. Against whom? Apparently this guy is so good at diplomacy, he stopped 8 wars. He didn't. He didn't. He stopped 8 wars in his head. Now that I'll give you. I mean, his head's so small. I mean, we don't know what he does, what goes on in there. It's probably just a hamster just running on a circle time after time. But people who just eat this up are just so incredibly engrossed in everything that this guy does. You have people who don't understand the complexity and the veracity of the First Amendment. Why are Democrats protecting criminals? I would like to remind you, the President of the United States was convicted of 34 felonies. Not 1, not 2, not 3, 34 felonies. You have a convicted felon inside the White House. And yet somehow you, people who are MAGA, who are listening to this, defend him. Tell me why you're defending a criminal. It was also these same people who felt that January 6th was a day of love. Didn't matter. Big deal. Oh, they're just good patriots. What? They beat up police officers. They sprayed them with pepper bear spray. They came armed with tasers, wands, batons, not wands. That would be kind of funny if they did though, but with batons, and yes, even some had guns. The right doesn't want you to know that they had guns, but they did. So, this is crazy to me. And then we come back to what I mentioned earlier. How the right says, well, just listen to law enforcement, you won't have a problem. I would like to remind you, if Ashley Babbitt listened to law enforcement, she'd be alive. Yeah, I went there. If the people there didn't just suddenly charge on the Capitol Police, we wouldn't be here. There wouldn't have been so many convictions. We wouldn't have a J6er here in the 19th Congressional District running as a Republican for Congress. Yeah, that guy's out there. He's still running for this stuff. And he's going to get some votes, folks, because there are some people inside the Republican Party who still think January 6th was no big deal. The average American doesn't think so. Independents don't think so, but MAGA Republicans do. They think January 6th is no big deal. Y'all making much ado about nothing here. They were hostages, as the president calls them. Yet somehow they're okay, but the protesters under the First Amendment are not okay. So this whole protecting criminals thing, I would like people to understand that's exactly what you did on the right, folks. You did that with January 6ers. You did that with the Charlottesville driver. I wish those same people would have came forward and said the exact same thing about the guy who, from the Dallas area, drove to El Paso and shot up a Walmart because he was afraid of an invasion from Mexico, coming from Mexico. He heard that from Trump. Yet I heard nothing from that. Heard nothing from it. Oh, it was awful. It was awful. Oh, that's just some nut. Whatever. but you bend over backwards as much as you can to defend those awful, terrible people, those sore losers on January 6th. And they got pardoned. Yet I also hear that, these Democrats now love all these, narco-terrorists. I would like to remind them that the president also pardoned a narco-terrorist, and he's done that a few times. Silent on that. Nothing to say on that. Not a daggone thing to say about it. Yet somehow wanting to protest is in a peaceful manner, and then you get stirred up here by ICE and CPB, and now suddenly that's on you. Public ain't buying that. Now, you may have seen some things come out here recently that Alex Preddy was, the weekend before he was killed, that he was, out there and, assaulting police officers. Okay, well, first of all, here's what he did. He spat on them. He spat towards them, by the way. He spit at them. And then kicked up dirt as they drove away. My gosh. That is some major stuff, folks. You spit on somebody. Oh. Come on. You just have to shake your head and go, you are really searching for something here. And it's the New York Post doing this. It's the Fox News crowd. It's the One American News Network. It's Newsmax. It may even be CBS News now that Barry Weiss and they since they bent the knee to the president, they may be saying that stuff too. But my point is, what difference does that make? Now, here's the other thing about Preddy that's making the right heads really just blow up. He had a concealed handgun license. He had a license to carry. He had a firearm on his person, and he never once brandished it. And somehow, when they're beating up the guy, they find his weapon, dislodge it, remove it from him, and then they shoot him. At no time was he brandishing his weapon. That has to be said first. But then you heard the president, Kash Patel, ATF, FBI Director Kash Patel, Secretary of Treasury, I think it is, Besant, say he had a gun. He had a gun. That's why they had to do it, because he had a gun. Oh, my. Oh, my. You should have heard what the right had to say about that. It doesn't matter if he has a gun. You can take a gun to a protest. They're out there saying that Preddy was not in the wrong. These are near fascist people who are saying gun rights is that you're wrong. That the president, ICE, CPB was wrong to use that as a rationale to kill Alex Preddy. That's what they're saying. And they're looking at the president and his administration and going, what are you doing? This is a group that got down on their knees and and said, you're our best return. You're our retribution. Did all that. But only for them to, when they hear him say that, go, that it's like that little scene from Revenge of the Sith, Episode 3 of Star Wars, where Obi-Wan Kenobi looks at Anakin Skywalker and says, but you were the chosen one. They're looking at Trump going, why? Why are you doing this? Bawling their eyes out, losing their minds. Because, folks, Trump is not a gun guy. He never has been a gun guy. He has no idea what to do with a gun. You tell him that, he'd be really interested if you said it's a 14, that gun is 14 years old. He'd be all about that. Epstein reference. But let's be clear. He's never been a gun guy. Not a once. So if you're worried that the fact he's coming after your Second Amendment rights, as a gun owner, I'm not surprised he said that. But I would also like to remind gun owners, you voted for this guy, so why are you surprised? Why are you shocked? He said that back in his first term. He said too many times, like he was talking to the vice president, too many times, they don't get the gun first. Get the gun first, then put him on trial. He said that. So I'm just wondering here, why are you so shocked? These are the things that he said. I don't understand why you're making a big deal out of something you already knew about. He already showed you who he was. You just love him so much because he has an R next to his name, and you care more about winning than you do about character. That's for both parties, by the way. You don't care about the core issues. Well, he's better than what a Democrat would be. How do you know that? How many times did Joe Biden infringe upon your Second Amendment rights? Did he ever say something? Well, they got a gun out there. He called a lot of MAGA supporters trash, which the president has done far worse things in name calling. He had that video where he had, of the No King's Day where he just, pooped on them all. And everyone's supposed to have, just laugh at that. That's no big deal. Yet, but y'all got your panties in a wad, or as one commentator said, knickers in a twist, or not getting our knickers in a twist. They really got their knickers in a twist when Biden called them trash, or when Hillary Clinton said that they were a basket half full of deplorables. Golly. That's as far as they've gone. There was no assault rifle ban under Biden. There was no restriction of where to go under places with being armed. There was no massive gun law reform throughout the United States, other than what happened at Robb Elementary, and even that was minuscule on every other part. That people saying a big deal about John Cornyn, how he's somehow some liberal because of the gun bill. Here's what that did. It gave states that have red flag laws money. It didn't bring out red flag laws. It just said that if you're a state that has red flag laws, you can get some money. You don't believe me? Do a Google search. You'll find that's there. So no, but the right's just lost their mind. The hypocrisy here is just so delicious. For someone who looks at things and just wonders why the right always thinks they're right, always thinks they are correct about everything. They always have that smug look of gotcha because they always think that they do. They always have the snark because they think that they're being clever. Well, you've just been out-clevered by the dumbest president we've ever had. I'm pretty sure that William Henry Harrison, who was only president for a month, could have a higher IQ score than the current president. I'm pretty sure about that. The difference between those two is that William Henry Harrison didn't do much damage to the country as this president has. That's why Harrison will always be better as a president than Donald Trump. What do you want from me? You want honesty? I just gave you honesty. And so this president says a few things about guns, and he, again, just to reiterate, he's never been a gun guy, folks. So why are you so stunned by this? I just want the right to understand that you put him here because he talked tough on immigration. He talked about the economy, talked about how he doesn't like pronouns, and he talked about, this whole, sports thing. That got you all riled up. He's weak on abortion. He's weak on guns. Why are you so stunned by this? I don't know. I don't know. I'm just wrapping my head, just trying to figure out the right. And so whenever I think I got them figured out, they start whining again. And now they're whining about this. I'm going to shift gears here just for a moment. I haven't been able to comment on the U.S. Senate race on the Democratic side between James Tallarico and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Look, the ones who are making this race as controversial, more controversial than what it really is, are those who are online, those who are on social media. A lot of conversation about where the polling is and all that. You had an Emerson poll that had Tallarico up by 9. You had an internal poll by Crockett that said she was up by 13. Now you have a new poll that was conducted by the Texas Public Opinion Research. Has a margin of error of plus or minus 3%. That essentially has this a tied race. Crockett leads Tallarico by 1 point, 38 to 37. Over a fifth, 21% of voters don't know what to do. So you have 38% are about 38% that are head on for Crockett, about 37% are head on for Tallarico. And the 21% they're not quite sure what they want to do. It's quite clear to me this polling is everywhere. There hasn't been any sort of consistent with anything. Internal polling is different than that of a public opinion poll that has certain parameters, that does certain things. If I paid for polling, I give it a directive, and you are measuring where you are with a certain amount of people. So this is essentially tied. This is a close race. We don't know how this is going to go, but I know when we're going to find out. We're going to find out on March 3rd. That's really it. The Texas AFL-CIO loves both of them. They didn't issue an endorsement because they're both quality candidates on the Democratic side. They're both dynamic in their own way. They are not the same. They may have the same policy ideas. They may agree a lot on policy, but a lot of it has to do with their character. It's essentially a personality thing here. Tallarico's pretty smooth. Congresswoman Crockett is fiery. She can be standoffish, and that's what a fighter is. But I will tell you this: both of them are not planning on John Cornyn being the Republican nominee. Both of them. They're both believing that Kim Paxton's going to be the Republican nominee. They're both planning on it. If you're voting in the Democratic primary, I think I think it's a pretty tough call here. Either way, if you're voting in the Republican primary, folks, there's a guaranteed winner in that. That's John Cornyn. Cornyn's not going to lose to either Crockett or to Tallarico. I think both of them make it really close. I think that would be probably his best competition that he's ever had. I do. I think that. I think it would be a pretty good race. I think it would be a fun race. I don't think it would be a winnable race for the Democrats. If you nominate John Cornyn, you go in there, if you're a Republican and you go in there and you vote for Kim Paxton, who's a sexual philanderer, who is corrupt, which, who has leaned on the president more than anybody else, begging him to endorse him. John Cornyn has done the same thing. They're both wanting the president's endorsement. The president said he's not going to do it. He's staying out of that race, which I was a little surprised about. But at the same time, nothing with the president surprises me or doesn't surprise me. But that said, you Republicans, you're really rolling the dice. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It's good to reiterate here. You're flirting with disaster, just like Molly Hatchet, if you nominate Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton will make this race closer than what you really want it to be. Ken Paxton can actually lose. Yeah. There's a lot of independents out there who don't trust Ken Paxton. There's going to be a lot. I mean, and let's also face this. There's a lot of research to suggest that if primaries get nasty, which the Republican primary is, if it gets nasty, you have a potential of losing a core set of voters who won't show up and vote. Like, it's not like they're just going to switch to the other party. They're just going to stay home. So, interesting. This is the big issue for Tallarico, is that no one really knows who he is. And there's a 35% visibility gap that was found by this particular research firm, who said they don't see or hear from Tallarico. 24% say that from Jasmine Crockett. Crockett gets free publicity. She gets free press because she's in Congress. Congress is a full-time gig. She makes her presence known there. Okay? Let's just make that clear. She makes her presence known. She's easy to spot. People can recognize her. The legislature's not in session right now. It's not in session in even numbered years. And Greg Abbott is not going to help James Tallarico, so he's not going to call a special session during this time period. I would be pretty shocked if he did. No matter what the lieutenant governor wants or any of that stuff, if he calls a special session, James Tallarico is going to take advantage of that. Not because he's a smooth politician, it's because he's an opportunist. And when you're a politician, you have to be that way. Both of them know it. So there's a visibility gap here, but good news for Tallarico is that he has more money than Crockett, and he's look. They're both going to barnstorm the key Democratic areas, and West Texas just isn't that. They're not going to waste their money coming out to Lubbock and coming out to Amarillo or Big Spring or Wichita Falls, Abilene, the Twin Cities of Midland and Odessa. They're not going to do it. So no, not going to happen. They're going to spend a lot of their time in Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, El Paso, the Valley. They're going to spend their time there. That's where most of the Democrats are. Interestingly enough. So it's a pretty close race on the Democratic side. Look, this is a competitive race, and I've said this before, and look, I just need to reiterate here. The Democratic side is going to be competitive. Tallarico and Crockett know each other. They like each other. They don't hate each other. The ones who are making a big hay of that are all the people on social media. Whether they're on Threads or Bluesky or X or wherever that they are, they're the ones making the big deal about it. Facebook, they're the ones making a big deal about it. And they might disagree on a few things. It might be a couple of key things that they think is the deciding factor. That's it. But as far as it getting nasty, no, it isn't. Republicans, their primary is nasty because Cornyn and Paxton hate each other. They hate each other. And that may even be putting it lightly. Okay. I think I wanted to say just one more thing here, and that has to do with just to shift gears completely. And that has to do with AI data centers. I'm going to do a lot of research on this to figure out what this is about. I only know a little bit. And what I know a little bit about is that it isn't exactly good. What I have found is that there's not a lot of jobs to be offered through an AI data center. I've also found that they take an awful lot of water, and they're going to be hooked up to the energy grid, and that's going to cause a lot of people to pay a lot more for energy. And you have to ask yourself this question: for what? And so I'm going to do some research on this, and I think that's going to be very good to really talk about. I said that was the last thing. This is the last thing. Sorry. In this upcoming week, as we leave January and get into February, this is going to begin the application for the voucher program here in Texas. For those who want to apply and all that, it's also going to be clear as to who is not going to get this money. If you are a Muslim school, you're not going to be able to get it, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. The governor and all the other people involved in this, whether it's the attorney general, whether it's the controller, people want to say comptroller. No, it's controller. Bob Bullock made it clear it's pronounced controller. That they're going to be able to not give money to private Muslim schools. So the whole school choice thing is only for one particular type of group. Private schools that are possibly just Catholic or Christian faith incensed. That's it. And if you're a true supporter of the First Amendment and the freedom of religion, and you're a true supporter of quote-unquote school choice, school voucher programs. School choice makes me roll my eyes. It's such crap. No choice. Then you should be very upset by this. You should. But here's what's going to actually happen here. Because that whole program is going to start in the fall of 26, this coming fall. You're going to have tuitions that are just going to rise above what the state's going to give you. Texas Tech Chandler Brandon Creighton, who, gosh, I mean, it must be some joyous bliss to live in that dude's head, because it must be like a screensaver of just, I don't know what, of living on a beach. I mean, that's just what's going on in his head all the time. He has no evidence of anything. All the evidence, all the scholarly evidence that is said about this is not good. All the think tank stuff that comes from the voucher groups, like, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, or this I Love private school groups. I mean, I can't think of any others off the top of my head at this moment. The Heritage Foundation, all of these quote-unquote school choice groups, they have research, which is not true. It's not research. It's cherry-picked malarkey. Says, oh, this is going to be great. Okay, look, here's what here's what I'll do for this. I'm willing to give this a 5-year experiment time. I'll give you 5 years. If those students who are entering into the 8th grade come 2026, fall of 26, they enter into the 8th grade. When they graduate by the spring of 31, I expect to see exponential student achievement scores on the exact same exams that public schools would have. I want to see them. Well, those private schools don't take those tests. Okay, well, let's take one test that they'll take, the ACT. Okay, let's take some of your best students from public schools and the best ones from private schools. I want to see student achievement exponentially raised in there. I want to see it. I want to see that evidence. And if 2031 comes around and those who went to that private school have this tremendously large, this larger scores than that of the public schools, I'll say, okay, look, the program worked. But if they're just a smidge better, or if they are worse, which is what the research has suggested, that's been over for 25 years. 25 years of research here, folks. 25, if not 30 years of research has suggested that they might do a little better or they may do way worse. If that happens, pull the plug on this issue. Pull the plug on it. It failed. Will the Republicans in Texas have the cojones to do that? I think the answer is no, because they serve Daddy Greg. They serve Daddy Abbott. Which, has he earned a 4th term? Has he really earned a 4th term? It's really key for us to think about here in the next week or so. What has the 12 years of Abbott gotten us? We can spend some time talking about that. All right. Thanks for being here, folks. Appreciate you joining me on this podcast.
The preceding analyses and opinions were that of Drew Landry and his alone. They did not necessarily reflect all of his podcast listeners or newsletter readers. Thank you for listening to the Outsider Podcast. Be sure to follow The Outsider on X and on Facebook. Also, don't forget to sign up to be a free subscriber to his newsletter on Substack. Just look for The Outsider. We will see you again next time.